Great. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Bridget and I are really excited to sort of walk you through this project that we worked on together. The Widener website launched last summer, and we're just going to sort of take you through this experience of how we really helped build brand engagement through the content strategy for this site. So when we started and sort of came in and partnered with Widener and looked at the landscape there, this is the challenge that we saw before us. What we saw was a lot of content, but it was all very siloed from each other. And when you have content that's siloed, such as you had these homepage features, then you had program pages, you had a newsletter and news content called What's Up at Widener, you had press releases, and then you had a separate website that collected media coverage. 5 distinct sort of content areas, all of which were disconnected from each other. And what that does is that really squanders the value of this content, because you had great things happening at Widener, great stories that were being told. When you have these silos of content, it inhibits collaboration among the people who are creating it. It encourages redundancy because people aren't sort of communicating and likely sort of creating multiples of the same story. And it's also just harder to see the big picture and align your communications work with your overall goals and to really get a more comprehensive understanding of the performance of that content. So a lot of value ends up being lost, and that's what was happening on the old Widener website. There's also sort of this low impact visual presentation. So this story, for instance, is a press release. It was about a faculty member winning an NSF Career Award, which is a really big deal, but is not really communicated in a way that is impactful. And while research shows that members of Generation Z, which is really that prospective student audience, favor short form, more visual, easily digestible content, the fact remains that for any audience, having an easier way to parse and understand the story and the impact of this story would be helpful and beneficial to the institution to do a better job of showcasing what's going on. We also had some redundant and unfocused content platforms. So again, there was this news site, What's Up at Widener, where again, there's great content that was sort of happening here, but we had issues where a lot of the stories that were being told here were redundant. And it wasn't really clear, like, well, what is the focus here? Is this focused on communicating to the outside world, to those external audiences, what's happening at Widener? Is it more for internal audiences? Because it says a newsletter for students, faculty, and staff, but the topics and the subject matter of the content sort of varied wildly. So it was kind of hard to get a sense of, okay, what is the sort of the authoritative home for content? There's some redundancies here. Who's the audience? Things were a little bit unfocused. There was also low content engagement. So for all this work and effort and hours that were being spent creating content, there wasn't really a good return on that investment. For across the feature stories and the news releases and the What's Up at Widener platforms, you had a very high bounce rate, which is often typical for news, but still concerning. It wasn't, we weren't really finding ways to mitigate that. It was really a very low percentage of the overall site traffic. It had about a 1 to 2 minute time on page, and there were really no calls to action. So a lot of that content effectively was a dead end. People might find it, link off of Facebook, link via search, sort of take it in, but then there was no sort of next step. There's no reasonable place for people to go after consuming that content. There also wasn't a way to sort of impactfully convey statistical stories and also maintain their accuracy. So there are multiple pages on the sites, and again, this is sort of that siloed issue where we had Widener at a glance, we had points of pride, we had success stories and career services, and on these pages alone there's really valuable information. It helps you get a sense of the Widener story and how Widener is really driving positive outcomes for its students and graduates, driving and how it has some unique characteristics to its academics in terms of student-faculty ratio and things like that. But you have to get to this page to sort of take any of that in. And some of these key stats or key outcomes are not presented in sort of impactful ways. We're not really doing any kind of narrative around some of these stats, and stats can tell stories, right? But they weren't really activated in that way. And it's also hard when you have this sort of approach to really maintain accuracy. We don't really necessarily have a sense of recency that's not consistently conveyed. So while these stats, the numbers might look interesting, it was lacking a little bit of the credibility of, is this current, is this accurate? And we weren't really able to activate these fully across the site. So in the chat, I think we'd love to hear a little bit from you all and get a sense of what are some of the barriers to great storytelling at your institution. I think the analogy that I've always used is sort of like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, right? If you don't have the process by which to really hear and learn what's going on and then act upon it and deliver on those stories in impactful ways. So I'm curious to sort of see you all, what are some of the barriers that you're seeing at your institution to telling great stories? Just pop them right in the chat. We can sort of put some out there. Silos, yep. Lack of, yeah, people not being able to not having those sort of connections to the communications department, so people don't know how to get those stories. Not being valued by the administration, that's a huge challenge. There's not sort of the executive awareness that this is important and we need to sort of invest resources and process around this. Staffing, for sure, not being able to staff to tell stories the way you want to tell. Time, yeah, it's always an issue. You know, with the limited amounts of time, how do you set priorities to sort of tell the most meaningful stories that are going to get you the most impact? Too much content. Sometimes there's just too much to say. How do we make hard decisions about what we publish and what we don't publish? I'm sure that our panel will be talking about that a little bit later. Too much science being reactive. That's a very common issue where you know, there's so much firefighting going on. How do we sort of rise above that to say, hey, we really need to get this story out there and be more proactive in that way? Not enough time to plan, time management. Time is a huge concern. Disagreement about what our larger story is. So I think I really appreciate you all sharing these here. You know, I don't want to sort of take too much time to go through all these, but as you can see, there's a lot of barriers. And and I feel like it's never that there's nothing to talk about, right? There's a lot to talk about, but it's more about how are we structured to really talk about those things and decide what of all the things that are going on, what it is that we're going to talk about and put that out there for sure.
Okay, so now that we've got the challenges out of the way, we did have a lot of opportunities at Widener, and these were strengths that Oho's team came in and helped us to recognize, and we recognized as well in our own. And I share these because you may also see these as a strength in your own university, or they may also be a challenge. So I think that going through some of these is important. So one of the first opportunities that we had no shortage of student stories, and I saw a lot of you mentioning that in the chat comments. There's a lot of stories to tell. We have exceptional student experiences, exceptional outcomes at Widener. We see a lot of transformative experiences, examples of experiential learning that often lead to an outcome for the student. So not only that, we were fortunate to have so many great stories to tell. We also had a process in place, and this was equally as important. Our beat reporters and our communications team were entrenched in the schools and departments across the university. And this was really set up to help us curate content. And it involved a number of things, cultivating those relationships, right? Educating on what is a story and what's not a story. A lot of times we would get story ideas that just didn't rise to the level of being an actual story that we would flesh out and tell on the website. Brand alignment, understanding what our brand is and sort of making sure that we're bringing stories in that sort of align with our branding. So all of those things helped us to mine different story ideas through the beat reporter structure. The second opportunity was that we had very clear vision and support from our university leadership. Our president, Dr. Julie Woolman, she came in and one of her first initiatives was to improve the communications and marketing of the university. Frankly, she was tired of our university sort of being recognized as underrated. And our students felt the same way. They were frustrated. They were proud of their accomplishments, the accomplishments of their peers. They wanted the external world to know what Widener was all about. And so having this vision from her and the support and the buy-in actually trickled down to many of the other senior leaders. And we were able to leverage that to execute our strategy. Now, this did not come as an easy, this was not just an automated thing. With the support, we had to cultivate this as well. And so we spent a lot of time meeting with the senior leadership team, meeting with deans, meeting with faculty throughout the process, continually updating them on our process, where we were headed, getting their input so that we had that support and we continued that support throughout the process. Chance to toot our own horns. We had a powerhouse team. I mean, we had a great team in place, and I think that this is really important to pulling something like this off. We had recently hired a brand journalist for the team, and she was a key team member. She was hired to craft feature stories for the web that were brand aligned, and so her whole role was for storytelling. I had actually been with the university for about 2 years before we embarked on this project with OHO, and I think that was really important in terms of getting a feel for the processes at the university. Who were the key players? Who were the people that we needed to involve in our decision making? You know, where the challenges were. We needed time to sort of get a feel for how the web was being managed and how the communications were rolling out. Our web content manager was phenomenal. Heather Astorga-Zenkman is on the call today. She's one of the attendees, and she's just phenomenal, not to mention her strong writing skills and her eye for design, user experience. She was a whiz at setting up spreadsheets and getting us organized in the way we were going to need to sort of manage the process of working within a small team, but also interacting with hundreds of people at the university to help us cultivate that content and get that into our process. And then of course our OHO team, they came in with a fresh perspective for us. They were able to look at our challenges, look at our strengths and opportunities, and really help us to drive the project forward. And they were the partner we were looking for. They were an extension of our team, and we appreciated their input all along the way. The new brand platform was actually one of the key pieces, and I highly recommend that if you don't have your brand platform in place, this is the first place you need to start. We had just finished a brand refresh initiative where we did a pretty deep dive into the market need and sort of our own positioning and strengths. And one of the things we landed on, amongst many other things, was that the primary focus of our students and the parents was that they were looking for outcomes. They wanted to see where Widener could help their student have a job advantage in the competitive marketplace. And so looking at that, we were able to develop our positioning, our, Georgia, if you want to go to the next slide, the positioning here, which is really a reflection of who we are today. And if you look at some of these these bolded keyword terms, these ended up becoming the pillars of our brand platform, the Powerhouse programs, being program forward, the mentorship of our faculty and the industry ties, you know, not just experiential learning for the sake of hands-on learning, but experiences that accelerated the student's career, getting them into the job before they even graduate. We had always been known for leadership. Our previous brand platform was Widener Leadership Works. And when we did a lot of this research, we realized that it wasn't just leadership development, but it was the professional leadership. It was you know, looking at that leadership in the midst of their discipline and in their field. That's where we were cultivating that leadership. And so we were able to kind of, you know, switch a little bit to focus more on that. And then we get into some of the warm and fuzzy, you know, which are just as important. The fact that we have a beautiful campus, we're located close to Philadelphia, and we have a happy community that feels like a second family. The other piece there is the vision. That's sort of more of an aspirational statement, and it's important for some of our messaging and the way we put that forward. But the value proposition was absolutely the most important piece of this as well. Widener is not an inexpensive choice for college. And so we really needed to address the value proposition head on. And a lot of institutions can make similar claims to what we have here. I mean, this may seem very similar to what many of you offer, but our value is really in the commitment that we have to the professional and personal success of the individual student. And so we've been able to evolve that value proposition more over time and evolve it, but that was an important piece of this platform. So that all resulted in a creative expression of the inside track. And here we lead again with the nimbleness of our programs, the program forward approach. The actual platform gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the clear pathways to student success, the advantage of the industry ties, the faculty mentorship, and really all of that that accelerates their career for the two-pronged outcomes argument, which is that Widener helps you get your first job, as well as giving you the differentiating skills and the intangible qualities to advance in your career thereafter. One final piece of this is the visual piece of the storytelling. And so we had two different options for our photo theory. The first one is focusing on the individual student portrait, showing their pathway to success. And I'm sure that this looks very hard to see here, but this is sort of based around these nodes and these track lines that sort of carry the student through their experience at Widener, all leading into their dream job or their The other example is what we call the in the thick of it shot. And this approach sort of positions the student in their field almost to the point where it blurs the line between college and the industry. And so this photo, you can't really tell if the student is still on campus, still learning in college, or if they've already gone out into their field. And so that's a deliberate visual strategy that we used for our storytelling. And I think really everything, it's really summed up well in our TV spot that we developed. And so I thought we'd take a quick commercial break here and take a look at the TV spot.
When I'm at Widener, I feel like I'm in the real world because it really helped me think about what I want to do with my career.
My advisor puts me in contact with different professionals in the industry.
Alumni are always coming back to help students and connect them with opportunities.
I've had 5 internships, and I just got offered a job with the Philadelphia Eagles.
At Widener, I've been getting ready for my career by doing it. And that's the inside track.
That's Widener.
That's Widener.
That's Widener.
That's the inside track.
So when we came and sort of, took all of this in and really saw that great foundation, that was great. Because I feel like when OHO's sort of coming in on these kinds of projects, like oftentimes we're either sort of helping find that focus or the focus is there. When the focus is, it's there and there's an alignment already internally around, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we want to say, this is what we want to emphasize, that's really great. So we really just sort of look to really drink that in and understand it and figure out, great, well, we have this platform, what's going to be the best way to articulate this on the website? So one of the first things is thinking about a publishing strategy that's activated with the right platform. So it was new for Widener to move to Drupal. And so that really allowed them to sort of get sort of dynamic content publishing and content reuse site-wide, having a real robust taxonomy. We'll talk about how that got activated to sort of support the storytelling. Having custom editorial workflow roles and permissions, and that was also an area of focus where whether it's the central marketing team or other outlying editors, making sure that they're able to sort of say, hey, this is the way that we want the site to be managed. We did some governance work with them as a part of that. We'll talk about that as well. And here's sort of how those roles need to be set up to really manage the site effectively. And a user-friendly content authoring interface. One of the ways that you can have a great content strategy, you can have a great design, you can have all these things, but if the authoring interface is not intuitive, if it's not welcoming for content editors, that'll all fall down. So we place a great emphasis on creating a user-friendly authoring experience, and that was something that, again, supports the overall content strategy at large. We also wanted to take a really holistic and audience-centric approach to the brand rollout. So